Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this IDRC webinar. We're super excited. We started a new series, a partner series of different agencies and organizations that we should be working with. And so really timely that Karen reached out and these guys, they were willing to participate and share the information about McKinney Vento. So I'm going to turn the time over to her and just mute myself and to her and her other panelists that they can share the information they have. But please continue to let us know what state you're from and your position, and we thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with you all today. I'm very grateful to Jessica for letting us join your meeting. I reached out to share some resources with her, and I'm really happy that we have this opportunity to collaborate. So it's really wonderful to be with you all. I am joining you from an organization called Schoolhouse Connection. And just very briefly, we are a nonprofit, a national nonprofit that advocates for overcoming homelessness through education. So my background is not only in working with McKinney Vento and students experiencing homelessness, but also working in migrant education and with the Latinx community in a school district. So I'm happy to share with you today some really basic information, and even more happy to have some panelists joining me today from the Colorado Department of Education and Metro Nashville Public Schools. So kind of the format of what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you just some really brief information and just a little bit of background on McKinney Vento. It's great and wonderful to see in your poll that so many of you have knowledge of McKinney Vento, and so many of you are already working collaboratively with homeless liaisons. So that's excellent. For those of you that are not, that's okay. We hope that today what you'll get out of this is some strategies to be able to work more collaboratively together, to really be able to do some cross partnerships and referrals back and forth between programs. So that's kind of where we're heading today. So this is information about Schoolhouse. I believe you have access to these slides, so I'll go through these very quickly. And you can take a look at those if you want more information. But as we start, I just really wanted to be able to share this information with you about race and ethnicity of students who are experiencing homelessness in the 2020-2021 school year. This is our most recent up-to-date data. And the reason that I think this is really important is because we have so many of our Hispanic and Latino students who are experiencing homelessness. Of course, we know not all of these students are migrant students, but it really is a large population of our students that are identified. Nationally, there's about 1.1 million students experiencing homelessness that are identified in schools. We also know that this number is low and that it's gone down due to the pandemic, but also we know that we're really under-identifying specifically among our migrant students. So I think this is just really helpful and important information to have. And just very briefly, wanted to share this data as well. So again, about 1.1 million students are identified as experiencing homelessness, roughly 2% of the population. We know, again, this is down. This number has gone down due to the pandemic and disconnecting with students because of the pandemic. So typically it's a lot higher than this. And we hope that as we're reconnecting with students and as we're kind of getting back into our normal world again, that we'll be able to really reconnect and engage those students and also identify those for support under McKinney Vento. And just very briefly, of our migrant students identified, there's roughly 15,000 migrant students identified as experiencing homelessness, approximately 1.4% of the total number of students experiencing homelessness. So I hope that's helpful data for you to look at. Again, I really believe that that number is lower than it probably actually is. And so I think this is really important and really timely in thinking through how can we really intentionally and strategically be reaching out to these families to make sure that they're receiving support, not only through migrant education, but also through McKinney Vento. All right, so I wanted to just give you a very brief, just kind of high level overview of McKinney Vento and just what that is. Many of you in your roles will not be responsible for the identification of students. You don't need to know the specifics and the ins and outs of McKinney Vento, but I think it's really important that anytime there's that cross collaboration, that there's a really basic knowledge, just kind of what McKinney Vento is and an understanding of that. So I'm gonna just give you some pretty high level information and we'll kind of talk through the identification of students and kind of how that works. So under McKinney Vento is a federal law that provides supports and protections for students experiencing homelessness. And so this law really defines children who are experiencing homelessness as those who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so any situation in any family that we work with, we kind of want to think about through that lens. So just very briefly what these mean, we really want to look at, are they in a stable situation? Is it a place they can return to every night? And really, does it meet their needs? And we certainly know that many of our migrant families are not in these situations. And they are often doubled up or tripled up, or there's more than that living in the same space, that they may not be really adequate. We want to think through kind of some of that substandard housing and make sure that it really is a safe and sufficient space. So when we look at our students who are identified as migrant students, they're not automatically eligible under McKinney Vento. We want to first look at their living situation. Do they meet this requirement of having a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? If they do, then they're not identified under McKinney Vento. If they don't, then they can and should be identified under McKinney Vento as well as under their migrant education. All right, very quickly about eligibility. I'm trying to get through this fast because I think the information from our other panelists will be the most impactful for you. But just very quickly about eligibility. Again, thinking through that sharing the housing of others. Are they doubled up? Are they tripled up? How many families are living together? And sometimes it's a choice for families to live together. You know, sometimes they move together and that's their plan and it's an arrangement and everybody is benefiting from that arrangement. That's not typically the case. So we really, again, want to look at, are they sharing housing? And then is it adequate housing? So families that are sharing housing would be eligible, those who are living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds, again, due to a lack of alternative adequate accommodations. Families in shelters, families living in places where it's not actually a living situation, so a car, a park, things like that. And then we want to look at our unaccompanied youth who are living in these circumstances. So we know that many youth come from other countries to do work in the US, and it doesn't automatically, again, make those students eligible under McKinney Vento. We want to look at their living situation first. And then if they're also not under the care of a parent or legal guardian, they would also have that unaccompanied homeless youth designation. And then again, as I mentioned, migrant children and youth who meet that definition of lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And I see in the chat, someone just asked, all trailers and trailer parks considered McKinney Vento? No, they are not. There are trailer parks and trailers that are in a place where that's a choice where somebody's choosing to live. Just thinking through, one of my colleagues always shares that her mom lives in a retirement community in Florida, who lives in a trailer in a larger trailer park where it's retirees and they get together and they have their activities and things like that. And it's an adequate space. It's hers. It's not substandard housing at all. And so a situation like that would make it not McKinney Vento eligible. If there's multiple families living in a trailer in a migrant camp, for example, and there's children sleeping on the floor, things like that, then it would absolutely be a situation. So it really depends on looking again at that. What is that housing like for that child? It's an excellent question. Okay, and when we think about eligibility, we really think about, again, what are our families' living situations? And so as you can see by this, the majority of our families are living in those doubled up situations. And this is not migrant specific. This is for all children and youth identified. But we know that about 75% of our students nationwide are living in these doubled up situations. And that's also true of our migrant students who are identified, that they are in approximately 75% of those identified are living in doubled up situations. And one of the questions that we get asked frequently when we think about families who are doubled up and kind of that cultural component, we know that in some cultures, in many cultures, that's a cultural value that families live together in multi-generational households. But we really want to particularly look at this when it comes to our children and youth and thinking through, okay, who's on the lease? Does everyone have a place to sleep? Is the living arrangement really for everyone's mutual benefit, or did somebody move in with somebody else? You know, just kind of what that living situation actually is. So just because a multi-generational living situation might be a cultural value doesn't automatically mean that if a family lives together with multiple generations, that it's not a McKinney Vento situation. So again, just kind of thinking through that. So don't assume if a family lives with grandparents or aunts and uncles that it's not McKinney Vento. It might be, and it might be that a family had to move in with relatives. All right, then very briefly, just want to share this. So it's not the job of the migrant recruiters or migrant ed staff to be making determinations of who is eligible under McKinney Vento. So I just want to put that out there because I know this was a very, very quick overview of McKinney Vento. But all public school districts and public charters across the country are required by law to have a designated homeless liaison. And it's the job of the homeless liaison to make sure that those children and youth are identified under McKinney Vento and receiving services. So if you're working with a family or you come in contact with a family, knowing who that person is going to be key to be able to make that referral to that person and to say, hey, you know, I met with so-and-so's family today. I'm concerned about their living situation. I mentioned you might be reaching out to them, and make sure that that kind of collaboration is really where that is headed, to make the liaison the one who actually makes the determination. And so my fellow colleagues on this call are going to talk much more about kind of that cross collaboration, but again, it's the referrals back and forth and making sure that the homeless liaison as well is able to understand the kind of the basic high level of migrant education and be able to make referrals to you all as well. All right, so under McKinney Vento, children and youth who are identified have the right to remain in their school of origin. And I think this is really important because we know our families move a lot and they're highly mobile. And so to the extent feasible, we want to make sure that those students have educational stability, and that really is the purpose of the law. However, we know that students often move between states, and it's not practical for our migrant students to remain in their school of origin when they're coming to Wisconsin from Florida. Obviously, we can't continue to transport to and from the school of origin, but if a student is moving around within a state or within an area, it might be in that student's best interest to remain in that school of origin, and they do have that right. Thinking through transportation, again, to remain in that school of origin, and also enrollment in school without the documents that are typically required. So I think this is really important. In my work with families, I know that sometimes they don't have their birth certificates, or they don't have some of their immunization records or other things that may be required. And under McKinney Vento, those are not required. So students can enroll in school without those documents. And then a really important piece of this, I think, that we've heard, especially during the pandemic, when there's been a lot of food insecurities, is that children and youth who are identified also have the right to receive free school meals, also school supplies, things that they need to really be successful. And another really important piece is partial credits. We know that graduation rates, at least in the state that I am in, are not where they should be in comparison to their housed peers and to their non-migrant peers. And so we really want to make sure that those students who are identified under McKinney Vento have that opportunity to get towards graduation, to get on track to graduation, and can really have credit and receive credits for the work that they may have done before changing school districts. There's some really great questions in the chat, and I will come back to those in just a minute. All right, I mentioned this about school enrollment. Again, this is really important for, especially, I know, states that have summer programs. It's often, you know, we don't provide McKinney Vento services necessarily during the summer, but our students are here for the summer. I think this is a really important connection of many of those students might stick around for the beginning of the school year and might be hesitant to enroll in school because they don't have all of those documents with them. And so making that connection between summer and school year is going to be really important to make sure that those students get enrolled and also connected with that homeless liaison. I did really briefly mention unaccompanied homeless youth, and just want to reiterate this, that those students who come to the US who might be working and might be wanting to enroll in school, they can. If they're identified under McKinney Vento, they do not need to have a parent or legal guardian to enroll in school. They can enroll themselves, or a caregiver can come and enroll them. So that might be just an adult or somebody else that they're staying with. Or the homeless liaison can be responsible to do that. So that's a really important piece that we often think, well, the student is here, but they don't have a legal guardian. So what do we do? Get them in school. That's the best thing to do. And they don't need under McKinney Vento to have that information with them. It's great to have some kind of caregiver form, so you have record of someone you can call in an emergency or something like that, or call in attendance, or call with concerns, about grades or whatever, but it's not required. All right, just very briefly, I want to mention about early childhood programs. We want to make sure that we're always asking about young children in the home and really working to connect our early learners to the programs available to them. So we do know that there are Migrant Head Start programs, and those are wonderful to connect students to, but there might be district programs as well, district administered early learning programs, district administered 4K or preschool. And so we want to make sure that we're asking and connecting those students as well. Excuse me, I'm sorry. All right, then very briefly about identification strategies, and you'll hear much more about this from my colleagues. We really want to first and foremost make sure that we're avoiding the word homeless, both when we talk with school staff and when we talk with families. We know just nationally the feedback that we've heard is that there's a stigma around that word, and families who have a roof over their head, regardless of what that might be, are going to say, well, I'm not homeless, I'm not sleeping on the street, I've got a roof over my head, so I'm don't identify me, I'm not homeless. Sorry. And so we want to just make sure that the language that we're using is really culturally sensitive, as well as using kind of that person first language and making sure that we're talking about our students. It might be a student experiencing homelessness or a student in transition, or even better, tell me about your living situation. Let's talk about the situation that you're in. Again, knowing the homeless liaison and having a process to refer families to that person is going to be really key. And then having a residency questionnaire, and that's a terrible term to use, so I'll call it a housing questionnaire. I'm sorry that I didn't change it on the PowerPoint, but having a housing questionnaire that families can fill out, either when you're meeting with them as, as a recruiter and you're meeting with a family, you might have a housing questionnaire that also the family can complete to really kind of bridge that gap of, okay, I do see that you're in this situation. I'm going to connect you with somebody else for you to talk to. So that's another great way to be identifying our students. Awareness materials are also really important, and making sure that those are visible in spaces where families are, and that they're in languages that families can understand. So if you have families who speak Spanish or Hmong or whatever it is, making sure that the posters and brochures that they have access to are in a language that they can understand. We also know that sometimes there might be concerns about first language literacy, and so finding ways to promote that awareness of McKinney Vento that doesn't involve reading or doesn't involve writing something. Maybe it's some kind of media where it's a commercial or some kind of commercial or a little video or something can also be a really effective way to reach families. We want to provide multiple options for enrollment. We know that sometimes families are in situations where mom is home with students and mom might not drive, and dad is working all day and is unavailable to assist with that. So instead of requiring those families to come into school to enroll, we want to just go where they are and make it as easy as possible. And providing resources and school supplies. And really that partnership with the homeless liaison is going to be key to do all of these things. All right, I'm talking way too much. I want to turn it over to my colleagues in just a minute, but want to share just one more slide about some strategies here. So we really want to create a welcoming environment for these students and families. We know that it can be really intimidating to enter a new school district in a new state, in a new educational system. And so we really want to create ways that welcome families and that acknowledge that those barriers might exist and find ways to break those down. Again, using a housing questionnaire, providing resource packets, helping families get connected to resources in the community, and then partnering with the homeless liaison to be looking at attendance and really making sure that we're monitoring the students' attendance so we can remove any barriers that might exist. And I just really briefly wanted to mention, there is a district that I have had the opportunity to do some work with that is in Colorado. And they have a really unique partnership, I think, with their regional office where their migrant recruiters are. And so their school district has has developed some really significant cross-training opportunities for their recruiters and those who work with their students experiencing homelessness. And so they've really worked to cross-collaborate so that everybody is trained on everything. And so if their recruiters are out meeting with migrant families, they know exactly what to be looking for, things that family might say to make those referrals to the homeless liaison. And the homeless liaisons know exactly kind of what those keywords are when they're meeting with families to make referrals to their migrant recruiters. And so again, that collaboration is going to be really important, and knowing kind of who to partner with and who to refer to is really going to be key. Okay, I see there are a few more questions in the chat. Jessica, I can go back and look at those. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything.
Yes, thank you. I know they're used to being able to put their questions in, and then we kind of answer as possible. I don't know the answers to this, so if you guys could help them, I think it'll help it make sure that they're asking the questions that they need from you guys too, to make sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see if I can answer a few of these quickly, and what we don't get to, I'll go back in the chat and answer those as well. Okay, this question: most of the housing places ask for Social Security, which is something migrant families don't have. We have families living in hotels and can't find something adequate. Absolutely, we know that is definitely something that comes up with families. And in that case, we know that families, they might have more than one family in that hotel. There might not be enough bed space in that hotel. And we really want to look at adequacy again. Where's the student sleeping? Does the student have access to what they need that really is going to help them to be successful in their learning?
And I would just want to say the disclaimer to anyone that's listening: it's not the case that all migrant families don't have Social Security numbers. So some don't, but a lot do.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of transportation issues for school of origin transportation, especially lack of buses and drivers. Yes, 100%. We hear that all across the country. And I will share a resource that we put together that gives some additional ideas on transportation. So maybe that will give an option. I'll put that in the chat in just a minute. The mileage limit to accommodate school of origin transportation, there is not a mileage limit. McKinney Vento does not specify a time or distance to provide transportation. So it's really looking at what is in the student's best interest. We presume under the law that keeping the student in their school of origin is in the best interest, because chances are they have relationships and connections with school staff. They know who their support people are. But of course, that's not always the case, especially with families who go between states, and those states might not be near each other. Can the family be reevaluated for the following school year? Yes, excellent question. So McKinney Vento status does not carry over from school year to school year. So it's really important that as we think about that collaboration between recruiters or those working with migrant education, they're really making sure that those referrals happen every school year. So every school year at the beginning of the year, families would need to be re-identified. All right, what to do when a school requires proof of address despite being a family living with another for economic reasons? Well, that goes against McKinney Vento. That is against the law to do under McKinney Vento. And in that case, if the homeless liaison is requiring that and there's challenges there, you can always reach out to your state coordinator as well, and they can work with the district to make sure that they're following the requirement under the law. Is there guidance about McKinney Vento eligible students whose school of origin is capped or at capacity? Are schools required to make space for a student even if they are capped? I'm assuming, I'm going to make a big assumption about this question, that it's some kind of special program or like alternative program within that school. So if there is like an alternative program within a school that is full and a student comes in to enroll in that, they need priority on a waiting list, but you don't have to like open up a new classroom for a student that comes in, for example. If it's a public school and that's where the student would attend, then the student does have the right to be there. So you can't cap a school of origin unless it's some kind of like alternative program that has time or that has space limitations. That's kind of a confusing question, and it's kind of a confusing answer. And I'm trying to go really fast, which is why I'm giving you not a great answer. If you want to reach out to me via email, I would be happy to talk more about that. So there are certain requirements, but it's a little more complicated than I can answer in just a few quick seconds here. Someone typed in the chat, no transportation for early education. If the early education is in a district administered program, transportation is required if that is a barrier for students to attend. If it's through a community-based program, then transportation is not required through the school district McKinney Vento program. All right. Let's see. Did I get everything? I think maybe. I do have some sample housing questionnaires that I can share as well.
Good job on answering all those. You guys still have 35 minutes though, so don't feel like you have to rush, between everybody. So really good information, lots of questions out there. So thank you for answering those.
Yeah, I'll keep answering some in the chat. And I do want to kind of conclude my part because I think the information that Noemi and Paula and Catherine are going to share is really going to kind of take all of this information and put it in a more practical way. So I am rushing through my part so I can turn it over to them. I know they have a lot of great things to say. So I will continue to answer some questions in the chat and drop in a few resources. And if we have time at the end, we can definitely come back, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our other panelists because they have some very excellent information. And just one more quick thing that I want to mention before I turn it over to Paula and Noemi. Schoolhouse Connection has a scholarship, and we really want to reach students who have not typically been able to access scholarships. And so if you have students that are identified under McKinney Vento, we'd love for you to share this information with them. If they have questions, they can reach out to me. And just want to make sure that you know that the deadline is coming up in mid-October. So I want to make sure that that's out there too. So with that, I will turn it over to Paula and Noemi, and I'll just keep going on the slides if you want me to. Just let me know when to go to the next one.
Great. My name is Paula Gumana. I am the state coordinator for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth program at the Colorado Department of Education. And I work closely with my colleague, Noemi Aguilar. Noemi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Good afternoon, everyone. Noemi Aguilar with the Office of Migrant Education within the Colorado Department of Education.
So Noemi and I are kind of going to be popping back and forth and just kind of filling in each other's gaps. But I have the honor and privilege of working with Noemi and her office around collaboration, intentional collaboration strategies and goals for building awareness, building capacity, and really moving to action in supporting what we'll refer to throughout our little part of the presentation as highly mobile youth. And Colorado Department of Education really defines that as, or in our work, we're defining that as those who meet the McKinney Vento definition, those who are experiencing the foster care system, and those in migrant education programs. So if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, so the last slide was me and Noemi's beautiful headshot. So I don't know why you sped past that so quickly, but this is our contact information and ways to get in touch with us following the presentation. And now we can go to the next slide. Noemi, I'm going to let you speak to some of this. I have been with McKinney Vento for 5 years. However, I've been in this state level role for just the past year. And the Colorado Department of Education has really held up a long tradition and precedent around this collaboration. But Noemi can speak to some of the most recent history in that.
Thank you, Paula. So as you can imagine, we have been attempting to create a deep relationship and collaboration / partnership with McKinney Vento for a while. And so we are very happy that at each year it grows and it becomes even more strong around how do we serve migrant youth who are highly mobile. And so one of the things that we started was just inviting McKinney Vento staff, both at CDE and within our regional program areas, to come and join us for our team meetings at the state level, for any of our regional meetings. We also invited them to our state conference that happens every year. So really trying to build the awareness as our first step of creating that partnership. And then recently we have really formalized that partnership by ensuring that these or this collaboration, this partnership is part of our overall office goals within the Department of Education. And so we wanted to formalize it, make it specific and explicit that this is something we intentionally will work on throughout the year. Now we know that this takes time. It's not going to all of a sudden be the best thing overnight. So we are very happy that we have partners such as Paula that we can work with hand in hand to ensure that all migrant youth and children and families are receiving the services that they need in order to be successful. And so we also are intentionally attending each other's training programs or training offerings throughout the year. And so Paula will be attending our State Parent Advisory Council meeting coming up in October, just so that parents gain a deeper understanding of what we mean by experiencing homelessness. We really want to diminish the sense of I don't want that label or I don't understand what that means, right? The stigma that may be associated with experiencing homelessness. So we really want to start from the ground up. We want parents to understand what this program can offer to their students, to their children, all the supports, all the things that they could potentially benefit from. And so we want to set aside that stigma, that label, right? We know that this is just a circumstance that they are currently experiencing that is not permanent. So we really want to help parents understand where we're coming from and why we ask that question when we do an IDNR interview to determine eligibility. Paula, anything to add?
No, I think that's a great introduction to where we are, where we've been, where we're headed. I share just in the enthusiasm of the partnership at the state level and the intentional and explicit and specific, you said that so well, around working together and deepening our practice. So I think in the history, it's been a lot of that, let's go to each other's regional trainings. Let's put together some more informal situations where highly mobile professionals who are serving highly mobile youth will be able to interact with each other and share different information and strategies about what they know. And then that internal cross training, just developing that state level relationship, which I'm so grateful to have. Just an example of that is on the next slide. Noemi and I are both part of the Student Pathways Division at the Colorado Department of Education. So all of these offices are within that division: adult education, student re-engagement, health and wellness, post-secondary workforce readiness, migrant education program. And then I actually live in the Office of Student Supports with out of school time programming, which is 21st Century, another out of school time programming for Friday school or summer school programming, and foster care education program. So it does help, I think, some of the more intentional collaboration in that we are within the same division within our agency. And that's kind of a new development. So migrant education came over to the Student Pathways Division. And I think that announcement was early this summer. And the response from my perspective was everyone was just blowing up the chat with how excited everyone was to have migrant as part of our division to really be able to streamline and work even closer in the collaboration. But the next slide really outlines for our performance measures. We had a shared goal under that division around advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion by collaborating around at least one of these areas. And so Noemi and I and a team from each of our teams started talking about this. How could we do this? Through a number of meetings, kind of came up with the next slide, which Noemi, do you want to speak a little bit to kind of where we decided to move to action?
Yes, and so part of the goal for the Office of Migrant Education will be to intentionally collaborate by providing technical assistance to shared audiences. So that is why we are here with Paula today. Any potential shared audience, whether it's liaisons within the schools or the districts or regional programs, any audience shared like parents or advocates that work within our schools. We are intentionally reaching out and ensuring that either migrant education is there at the table, or that through migrant education, all other offices, specifically McKinney Vento, is also at the table. And so we intentionally invite one another to ensure that everybody is present. And we also include another colleague, Jamie Butsiaga, who is in charge or leads the foster care efforts. So we intentionally do that. We also hope that with our efforts, we will increase the awareness amongst not only school staff, but all regional migrant education staff, what exactly McKinney Vento is, what it is not, and really the importance of creating those relationships with the school staff. Because we like to tell our regional staff, we know that you might know that a family is experiencing homelessness. But until you connect that family, that student, with the McKinney Vento liaison within the school, that does not transfer. That designation, that flag within our own state data system will not be transferred. So that intentional collaboration between our programs is essential to ensure that students are receiving the supports they need.
And I think overall, McKinney Vento is really focused on reducing barriers to access and success in school. So we do want to hold up opportunities, as Noemi stated, to build that awareness, to build that capacity, but also to encourage people to take action in their local communities around how to break down some of those barriers to access for students experiencing homelessness and students in foster care. And so as we started thinking about, what will some of this collaboration look like in moving to action towards our goal, the next slide really kind of delineates some of those themes. So awareness building, and then bullet pointing some of the pieces that Noemi spoke to, capacity building, really helping to overcome those stereotypes and identification, really building that kind of beyond awareness, but really being able to apply those concepts. We are making intentional efforts to try and hold up and engage with people with lived experience. So trying to really document and gain perspectives. I had a great conversation with a member of the migrant education team yesterday about my presentation with the parent advisory group. I'm really excited for that presentation and really posing some questions to them, like how can we help you in taking this message back? But really trying to engage that parent voice and provide parent support so that they can go to their communities and share and build capacity, but also speak from their voice as a parent. And then really reducing barriers. So helping to support local communities and looking at their policies and practices. What is getting in the way of us being able to collaborate? What is getting in the way of students being able to access and succeed in school? And calling upon some of those kind of opportunities where there are natural educational points. So transitions from early childhood into kindergarten, transitions from middle school into high school and high school into post-secondary options. So trying to leverage those points to reduce barriers as well. And then our final slide is some of the concrete high impact opportunities that Noemi and I identified as part of this larger group that we are working on to provide more technical assistance. We provide monthly highly mobile youth peer-to-peer conversations. So any school staff or district staff or regional staff who works with highly mobile youth is invited to attend these peer-to-peer conversations where we do kind of a timely topic. We did mental health resources in September. We're looking at doing an unaccompanied homeless youth or an unaccompanied youth presentation in October. And so it gives the professionals working with highly mobile youth opportunity, again, to be in that informal space and share what's working in those breakout group conversations about how to help serve highly mobile youth in the area. I have an Education of Homeless Children Youth grant. So I am bringing together all of the grantees at the end of October, and we are calling upon migrant staff and those who support foster youth in Colorado are called Child Welfare Education Liaisons to that sub-grantee meeting to participate in a facilitated conversation about overcoming challenges together and providing more access and success for students. Noemi mentioned the PAC convening again. Do you want to share more about your migrant education state conference?
Sure. And so every year we convene all MET-funded staff from throughout the state to come together to talk about current issues or obstacles, and even best practices around how we serve migrant children, youth, and families. And so part of this, we intentionally invite agencies and or programs from CDE and from our community to come and talk to our staff. So everybody is understanding what's available to them, what they can tap into, what access they have in order to ensure that that support system is built around each and every migrant student. And so we're happy that Paula had some time on her calendar to join us this year in November to talk about that strengthening of collaborations amongst community agencies, but also at the state level. So as you know, working at the state, there's a lot of bureaucracy that one has to get through, right? So what we are intentionally trying to do is to get rid of those bureaucratic hurdles or obstacles, or even questions around why are we doing what we're doing and how can we ensure that those serving families at the local level do not have to face these barriers. So whatever we can do to diminish those at our end at the state level, we hope will then increase participation, increase partnership, but also decrease those obstacles.
I'm really excited for that conference as well. We talked a lot about bringing examples and scenarios in that presentation to really help folks work through some of these. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about like, what about this scenario and what about that scenario? And so bringing some of those to the state conference presentation where people really get a chance to workshop some things together. So I'm excited for that in November. And I can't help but chuckle that like I have room in my calendar because it is pretty jam-packed, as I know Noemi's is as well. We're also trying to get off the ground a series of regional collaborative conversations. So again, we're working with local communities, and I saw Esmeralda Martinez is on the call. She was really one of our first regional collaborative conversations in the San Luis Valley, but bringing together these partners locally to talk about highly mobile youth, the resources that are available to serve them. And one kind of lesson learned from the San Luis Valley is then, what to do with that information. So our next iteration of the collaborative conversations is going to have an action planning component where we have local partners really trying to solve those problems around collaboration and providing more access and opportunity for highly mobile youth. Noemi mentioned Jamie Burciaga. She runs our Education Stability Grant. Sorry for the acronym there, but that's what ESG stands for. Education Stability Grant is the state funding in Colorado to support highly mobile youth. So it supports those who are McKinney eligible, part of the migrant education program, as well as foster care. And so as she brings together her grantees, she's going to be doing more cross-training as well. And there is in Colorado some new legislation that set up a navigator model for supporting highly mobile youth, specifically foster care, in transitioning into higher ed opportunities. And we have a model called the SPOC model in Colorado. It's a single point of contact model that supports unaccompanied homeless youth in their transition into post-secondary options. So we have a SPOC at every public 2-year and 4-year institution across the state. And we're looking at ways we can braid those models, the navigator model and the SPOC model, to better support highly mobile youth as they transition. And we talked a lot about how we might be able to incorporate the migrant programs on campuses to help support that as well. Noemi, would you have anything to add to that last one?
Yes, specifically because of our college assistant migrant programs, as you know, our CAMP programs. So we want to make sure that those representatives who are in higher education are also partnering and collaborating with the CAMP programs within our state. So making sure that we connect them as the state. One of the greatest leveraging tools we have is to bring people together. And so we really are leaning in and making sure that we use that leverage power to bring people together. And so that we intentionally ensure that people from the communities are represented so that when we leave, nothing falls into a vacuum, right? So that those relationships are established locally, regardless of whether or not the state is present.
Thank you both so much. I'm trying to keep track of the questions in the chat and answer those, so I'll continue to do that. But I want to turn it over to Catherine from Metro Nashville Public Schools, and she is going to share about some of the partnerships that they have.
Well, thank you for joining this conversation today. I know that I have learned a lot, and I have been a McKinney Vento liaison for 26 years. So you know you're in a good place. If I learned something new, then I'm sure you have as well. And I'm really here just to share more from that district liaison perspective. So that boots on the ground perspective of how all these great ideas really might work, and what you might be able to achieve or accomplish in your own school districts. And I will share, so I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and we do not have a real high percentage of migrant youth in our district, but we've had some really successful partnerships over the last 5 years with our immigrant and refugee population, working with our English learner office. And so I just am really going to spend a few minutes sharing some of those strategies of what we found to be successful at the school level in terms of working directly with families, working directly with school staff and community partners. And something that was touched on earlier, I think, the biggest thing when you're doing outreach and partnership with school staff or community partners, the migrant outreach folks, is to really highlight what those McKinney Vento benefits are. And so I know there was a lot going on in the chat about transportation, but I always say in my work, there's a lot of things. I'm a social worker, and there's a lot of things that I can do that make people feel good and they're happy to get new clothes. But that transportation piece and giving students that opportunity to have stability in school, even while they are experiencing disruptions in all other aspects of their life, that's the biggest benefit that I can offer to families, to students, and also to teachers in schools, right? Is knowing that student that you've invested into and you finally figured out what's going to work for him or her, knowing that through our McKinney Vento program, we can keep that student with you. So we did some really intentional work a couple of years ago with our English learners office to really help staff understand what those McKinney Vento benefits were, and that we were certainly not looking to just add another student to our state report, or just, increase our numbers, or, as has been discussed earlier, provide yet one more negative or unappealing label to students or families. It really was our desire and our wish through our McKinney Vento program to identify all students who are eligible so we can open up that access to services. So I think in all of the things that I've done in my 26 years, that really intentional work we did with school district staff. So it wasn't, we didn't really necessarily have barriers with families or with community partners, but helping our own staff members understand that when we administer that student residency questionnaire, that housing questionnaire, our intent was not to be invasive or get into overly personal details, but we were really just trying to see, was this a student that we could in some way support through our McKinney Vento program? And I think, one of the kind of turning points for us was when we started hearing directly from classroom teachers that, my student came in, we're 6 weeks into the semester, and he was so upset because he came to tell me that Friday will be his last day because their families had to move. So I think remembering that all of this information and cross-training and awareness needs to trickle all the way down to those classroom teachers, to school secretaries, to cafeteria staff, to bus drivers, because there's all sorts of people who have much more direct interaction with students and families who are going to hear things and pick up on things that, sitting in my office at the support hub, I'm never going to hear. So I think really train staff and raise awareness far and wide amongst all of your school district employees, and really, again, highlight that benefit of what McKinney Vento offers, rather than just, making it appear that you just want to, increase your numbers. So I think that awareness, and then that cultural sensitivity piece. And, I confess, and, when I started this career many years ago, we looked at so many families and said, oh, you're doubled up, but that's a cultural choice. And we don't want to ask too many questions. And we're not really comfortable with this conversation. So we're just going to, let 19 of you all live in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we're going to pretend like that's okay. And that's really where everybody wants to be. So, I confess we've not always done a great job of that in our community, but I think it's really having, and Karen's slide gave some really great questions of really looking at the heart of the issue. And are you living here by personal choice? If you could no longer stay here with your cousin and her family, where would you then go at that point? So I think really helping, to normalize that we understand families live together for a variety of reasons, and we're not here to judge or or evaluate your situation for any other reason than to determine if we can provide services to you. So I think, certainly, highlighting that. And then I think in terms of working with the families, something that has certainly come up in our district is a lot of families are very reluctant to fill out additional paperwork. They're not quite sure what's going to happen with that information. And so we work really hard to, assure all families, and Schoolhouse Connection has some great information, that can really work to allay people's fears about being identified as a McKinney Vento student will in no way jeopardize any future, asylum claims or citizenship claims that you might be trying to make. So I think helping families get really comfortable with, this is school district information, and under FERPA, this is information that stays within the district. We're not talking with community landlords. We're certainly not talking with ICE, but, really, understanding that those are real concerns that many families have, is if I fill out one more of these forms, that's just one more place that details about my personal life are going to be where I don't want them to be. So I think really acknowledging that head on with families is that this is school district information only, and participating or being classified as McKinney Vento will in no way affect you, with any other government program that you might be seeking to engage with in the future. And then just recently in my department, so we're in the federal programs office, we've had some staff changeover, and now our migrant outreach employee is working under my office now, which is a great partnership for us, and particularly being here with you all today. But one of the things she and I talked about last week was really thinking about those highly mobile students. And when you meet them, provide them with all the information they need on the front end about being welcome to your district and what the district can offer and what the district can do to support them. But also at that same time, because you're not quite sure how long you might have that student or have that family in your district, providing them with information that if they were to up and move, in the middle of the night or over a weekend or over a school break, but really providing them with information on the front end that they can then use when they move on to another school district, and that they would know to contact and ask for the migrant education program or ask for the McKinney Vento program, but to do all that we can when we first encounter families to prepare them for what we can do, but then also what will happen if something changes for you. And I think, just being very transparent on the front end that we know a lot of situations that people hope will be long-term or hope will be permanent, can change overnight. So I think really addressing that on the front end. And a lot of times with our families, they'll say, well, but I'm staying with my sister and I'm going to be here till I get my own place. And so, I don't really think that we're McKinney Vento now. And so we say all the time, then absolutely, we're not going to, label you this or sign you up for this program, but just know that if something changes down the road, right? So a lot of times people think, oh, my sister, she's great. She'll let me stay for 6 months and it doesn't matter how long it takes, but something might happen. So even letting families know at that initial moment, if they're not perceiving that their situation is unstable, or they think it is fixed, regular, and adequate at that moment, to let them know that they can change their mind about that down the road. So a month into the relationship, if your sister says, oh no, you've got to go, then they can reach back out at that point and say, okay, well now my situation has changed, and so I think I really would like to engage with your program. So and then another thing I think is really just in terms of providing resources, be really specific and targeted and give families what they need. And so as a social worker, we are notorious for, we sit in offices and we decide what will benefit our folks. And we don't really listen to the families and students that we're serving. A classic example for us is we've got new space that opened this great food pantry that is well stuffed with Pop-Tarts and mac and cheese and, limited things, but we don't have any variety. And we certainly don't have any ethnic or cultural food that might be more appealing to some families. So really listening to all families that you work with and getting feedback about what it is they actually need and want from us. And then I see we had a 5-minute warning, and I know that Karen might have some more questions in the chat. So I will be quiet at this moment, but feel free to reach out to me after today if you have questions or want some help in how to better work with your McKinney Vento liaison, because I do think it's an important partnership. And I'm just glad everybody could participate today.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat a little more easily. Catherine, thank you so much. That was wonderful information. I do want to just take one quick minute to address the question in the chat about the protocol when a MEP recruiter refers a student to McKinney Vento. I think that's a really excellent question, and it's kind of this like, okay, I have this information, what do I do with it, and then what? And also, all of you feel free to jump in, but typically when this happens, so if you're concerned about a family's living situation, if you go to a home and you're meeting with a family and they say, yep, I live here, there's 4 families living here, my kids are sleeping on the floor. We want that to, situations like that to be a trigger. Okay, this might be a living situation that we should be concerned about for this student that might be McKinney Vento eligible. When you take that information back to the district homeless liaison or a social worker or a point of contact or whoever it is in the LEA that is responsible for identification, you may not ever find out what happens and what comes from that. So one of the key pieces of McKinney Vento is that it is protected information. So Catherine mentioned that as well. It's similar to free and reduced lunch status. So that information cannot be shared unless there's a legitimate educational interest or need to know. So you may make that referral to the homeless liaison and never hear about it again. And that's okay. And that's not uncommon. You may be asked to be involved in a conversation with that family. If the family trusts you and they know you and they don't want to talk to the district homeless liaison or a school social worker because they don't have a relationship with that person, and they say, hey, can you join me for this conversation? I want to make sure, I just want to have someone I'm comfortable with. That's okay too. It's the family's information to share with you. So if they choose to include you in that, that's totally fine. So once that referral is made, it's the responsibility of the liaison or the social worker or the point of contact to reach out to that family and say, hey, I received this information. I want to talk through our McKinney Vento program, what services we can provide you with, what extra support we can provide you. So hopefully that answers the question, but I think that's really helpful to know, to just kind of how that process works and to know that it's protected information, because when I was in a district, I can't tell you the number of times I heard, well, I don't know what happened. Nobody called and told me that the student was identified or not. And the number of times I had to say, yep, it doesn't actually, like, you continue to support that student. And if there is something you need to know about their living situation, we'll let you know when it's actually something that would affect maybe a classroom setting or something. One final question in the chat. McKinney Vento expires after a year. So it is for the school year, but a student can be re-identified for the following year. So there is no time limit on homeless status, on homelessness. We know that especially due to the pandemic, homelessness is persisting even longer. So a student could be identified year after year after year, depending on what their living situation is, but they would need to be re-identified every year. There's lots of questions coming in the chat. I will put my contact information. I'm happy to answer questions. We'll see if I can multitask here and spell connection right. That's my email, so feel free to reach out if we didn't get to your question. And Jessica, maybe we can try to put some more information together for you to send out to everyone as well. So thank you again so much for having us today.
No, obviously it was needed. We see all the questions. There are a lot of, I guess the last question, because there were a couple times people said, what resources? Can you give just a quick rundown of some of the resources that McKinney Vento can provide? And then we'll finish right after that. And then as a reminder to everybody, if you'll fill out the evaluation, that just helps us know your feedback. So I'll drop that in the chat box one more time.
Yeah, absolutely. So McKinney Vento does give certain rights under the law. That school of origin, I mentioned that before, to remain in their school of origin when it's in their best interest, of course, and when it's manageable. Transportation is a big one. Free school meals is a big one. It's, anything that student needs to be successful. So whether that's school supplies or hygiene products, referrals to community partnerships, if there's something that student needs that the school can't provide, it's helping connect with places in the community, receiving partial credit from classroom work being done in other states and other places. I think those are the highlights.
I think the main thing to know, though, about those McKinney Vento resources is they vary from district to district. So, some districts get a lot of grant money, some districts get a little bit of grant money. So, I think it's just connecting with your McKinney Vento program, saying, what services do you specifically offer? And then certainly chiming in if your liaison has a plan and it doesn't include anything that you have many students who need, offering to work with them on the next grant application or identifying a community partner. As liaisons, we do a really good job of trying to, listen to our families and figure out what they need, but it's always important for us to hear from other educators and other community partners about, but these are, the big gaps that you're not addressing. So I think, checking with your local liaison and seeing how their program is set up and what they offer, but it can be pretty diverse, which is nice, but then we can't pay for housing. So that's a big, it's educational money. And that's always the issue. We can't pay for housing, can't pay for deposits, but certainly network with your liaison to offer suggestions.
But just add that when it comes to funding, we have every state kind of handles it differently too. So depending on what state you represent. So we have our sub-grantee districts, and then we also, for the first time, have American Rescue Plan homeless children and youth funding. So there is more funding being dispersed to districts, and for some districts for the first time. So certainly, if you're interested in knowing what's happening, reach out to the liaison, like Catherine said. Also, you can use Title I set-aside dollars to support homeless children and youth. So even if you don't have a sub-grant, there may be funds available, or at least Title I services available to help support those youth as well. So a lot of relationship building in McKinney Vento.
Well, a great big thank you to Karen for reaching out, and for all of you guys for being willing to share with us. I think we've all gained a lot of insights and appreciate your time and the knowledge that you've shared with us. So thank you very much. We'll go ahead and end for today and appreciate everyone's attendance. And again, thank you to the presenters.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.